Hello everyone, my name is Lucas Johnson and I run a story design and video game company called Silverstring Media. We've been working with the Lewis and Clark Library to help bring you this awesome Tom Sawyer big read. As part of the theme of the adventures that make us, we've invited you to submit your own adventures to us at tomsawyerBigRead.com. Stories or pictures or music or however you want to. We want you to be creative, and right now I'm going to teach you about a new way that you might want to do that. I'm going to teach you how to use this really cool tool called Twine, a tool that lets you make your own video games with absolutely no real computer programming. Twine is a program for making text-based games. There are ways to put in pictures and music and stuff, but the core of it is to make games that play out entirely through text. This could be anything from a choose-your-own-adventure type game to a role-playing game complete with stats and equipment, though that can get a little more complicated. Today I'm going to go through the very basics of Twine, how to use the main functions so that you can start making your own text-based game, and challenge you to use it to describe your adventures. I'll also give you some resources that will let you do even more with Twine and show you some examples. So first things first, you're going to want to go to twinery.org. There's a link down in the description of this video to download Twine. That website also has a bunch of Twine game examples you can check out to see just what Twine is capable of making. Once you've downloaded and installed it, you can open up a new project, and I will show you what that looks like. It looks like screen share. There we go. It should look something like this. So this is the main screen of Twine. You have all of these little boxes on the screen, and you can move these around wherever you want just by clicking and dragging. And this is sort of how you're going to construct your Twine story. So first we have a couple of major things here. We have story title and we have story author. You're going to want to edit these with your own story title and author. And you do that just by double-clicking on that box, and then a new window pops up. You want to leave this title as story title so that the program knows that this is going to be the title of your story. And then you can actually type whatever you want here. Example story. Once you've done that, you just close it and you're done. And then story author, Lucas Johnson. And that's it. So to actually construct your story, you're going to start with the start box, which makes sense. Let me just make sure that these are showing up, which they're not. Screen share. We're just going to get full screen sharing. There we go. Whoa, that is amazing. All right, so this is what we're looking at, and I'll just show you those windows again. So we have example story. You just type the name of your story here, and you can just close it. Story author, type it there, and close it. And you want to leave those titles, story title, and story author. Now we come to the start box. And this is going to be the first page of your story. Each of these boxes is basically the page of a book or one screen of your ultimate story. The first one needs to be titled Start, capital S, lowercase everything else, so just don't change that. And then you can type the introduction to your story here. So we might say, you are in a dark forest. A path moves ominously through blooming trees. And then, when you actually build and start your story, that is the first sentence that you will see on the screen. But that's not an interactive story. That's just a couple sentences. So what we want to do is we want to create a link to a new page. And how we do that is with these square brackets. So we say move down the path. And then we put a bar and then type the name of the next page that we want to go to. We're going to call it path. Then you close it off with another 2 square brackets, and it has to be 2. And when you've done that, you'll see it changes color so that you know that you've done that correctly. Then we can close that. And now we see that there's a little exclamation mark in the bottom right-hand corner. That means that there is a link in that window that does not have a destination, and that's because we haven't created the destination yet. So we're going to do that by clicking on this icon here. This adds a new passage to our story. So we click that, and we get Untitled Passage 1 over here. So now we can open this one up, and we want to say, you move down the dark path. Trees loom over you, the branches creaking. There are no birds chirping. The silence is deafening. But for this to be the next page that we see, we need to make the title of this page the name of the link we created, which is path. We say path. Now you'll see immediately there's an arrow over here. That means that these 2 pages are linked. So now you will see when you play the game the first sentence and then a link. When you click the link, it will take you to the second one. And as you can see, we can move these around and the arrow will follow it no matter where it goes. So we can, once we have a lot of things going on, we can organize our story however we want. So now we're on the path and we want to see where the story can go. So maybe we come to a fork in the path. One trail leads off into darkness, into the darkness. The other ends at the fence of an old cottage. Reading a little Grimm's fairy tale here. So we want to give you the choice of which path you go down, since this is sort of a choose your own adventure type thing. Now, one way we could do that is to make 2 links at the bottom that say go down the path, and then a bar to a new page that will be called path 2. And then the other one could be go to the cottage. And then we say cottage. So that's one way that you could create links to the rest of the story. The other way that you could do it, which I'm going to show you, is actually putting those links within the text itself. So you could say, one trail leads off into the darkness, path 2. The other ends at the fence of an old cottage. Now those links are going to actually appear in the text, and you can just click on whichever one you want to do. Now we save that. And now we have to, of course, create those new pages. The path continues. The cottage is made of old rotting wood. And now, as you can see, we have 2 different pages coming off the same passage. This is where our story branches. So now if you go to the cottage, you're going to get all sorts of other things happening. And then if you go to the path, you're going to get a completely different story. Now, if you're making a story like this, you have to be careful that you don't let your story become too branching. If you have 3 options in the cottage and they all lead to a whole bunch of other things, and then you have 5 options down the path and they all lead to a whole bunch of other things, you're going to have a lot of story very quickly, and it becomes very, very hard to actually write all of that content. So you want to keep the amount of choices to a minimum to some extent, and maybe find ways to bring things back. For instance, on this path, it says the path continues on and on and on. So then you might say, you know what, I actually don't want you to go down that path. So I'm going to say, go back to the cottage. Cottage. And now, when people play the game, if they choose to go to the path, then they get this, oh, it's just going to be sort of this endless path. Well, the only real option then is to go to the cottage. So now, no matter which choice you made here, you're going to end up at the cottage where things will happen. And that's one way that you can sort of limit the amount of work that you have to do to tell your story while still giving the player some options. So that can go on and on quite a bit, but that's at the core, the very basis of Twine. That's pretty much all you need to know to make a really interesting, branching, interactive story like a choose-your-own-adventure game. And when you get much more, you're going to get something that looks like this. This is a Twine that I made a little while ago. And it's not that long. It takes about 15 minutes to play or so. But as you can see, there's a lot of boxes happening here, and a lot of arrows pointing every which way. But the benefit of Twine and this sort of graphical interface is that it becomes a little easier to keep track of where the story goes. Obviously, this is the beginning of the story, and then there's a few choices here, and then it splits into 2 different options before ultimately coming back to an ending, and then a couple options right at the end. I have a couple links in the description to this video, so that you can first of all play this game that I made. It's called Before the End of the World. And then I also have a link where you can actually download this Twine file so that you can look at the specific passages that I've made here and look at the choices that I've given players and all that kind of thing. Stop screen share before that gets too crazy. So, like I say, that is the very basis of Twine. You don't need to actually know anything else. However, I will teach you a couple other cool things that you can do. Now, this is getting a little more complicated. This is getting into a little bit of code, but it lets you do some really interesting things, from tracking variables and inventory to stats, all sorts of things if you are interested. So we'll go back to screen share here. The first one, or the main one, is creating variables. So variables, if you know anything about computer programming, is if you say, x equals 5, and then whenever you go through something and you say, and you can ask the computer, what is x? And then the computer will say, well, x is 5. And then you can change that. So in Twine, you could create something, say, your inventory of, you're trying to collect magic stones. And you start with 0 stones. So how we're going to do that is we're going to go into the start page, and we're going to create some code here using these corner brackets that says set stones equal to 0. And now we have created a variable which is determined by this $sign called stones, and this can be, magic stones, as long as this is one word. And we have said that the variable equals 0. You have 0 magic stones. Then we can close this. And then maybe if we go down the path further, but you find a magic stone. And now we can create code here that says set magic stones equal to, and then we can either say set it equal to 1, so now you have 1 magic stone when you go down that path, or you can say set to magic stones plus 1. So now if previously in the story you had found other magic stones, it's not going to, maybe you had 5 magic stones. If it just said now set magic stones equal to 1, that's going to make the computer think that you only have 1 magic stone. If you say set it equal to magic stones plus 1, it will increase the number of magic stones you have by 1, making it now 6. In this case, we're increasing it from 0 to 1. And then once we go to the cottage, we can say if magic stones equals, and when we're checking to see if it equals something, we just say EQ equals 0, then we can say something. The cottage is dark. But then we can say if magic stones equals 1, your magic stone glows, lighting the cottage. Now, let's see if that worked. And oftentimes, the first time you try to use some code, things don't work as planned. But what you're going to do once you've started making your story to test your story and see what it looks like is go to Build. We're going to hit Build, and we're going to hit Build Story. And then we can save that somewhere. And it opens up an HTML file. So that's the other benefit of Twine, is that you can actually just put it as a web page online and anyone can play it. You don't need to download it. So this is what it looks like. We see example story by Lucas Johnson, and we see our first sentence. You're in a dark forest. A path moves ominously through the looming trees. Then we have a link, move down the path. That takes us down the path. We come to our second page, and we can either go off into darkness or we can go to the cottage. Now let's try going to the cottage first. Oh, it needs an end if. Like I say, so if you're using if statements, you start with an if it equals 0, something happens. Then the alternative is else if, as in if it's not this, then it's this, equals 1, then this happens. And then at the end of that, you have to have end if in the corner brackets as well. So we're going to rebuild story. And then hit that again, wherever it went. We'll do test play. Move down path, and then we go to Old Cottage. And because we don't have any magic stones, it says the cottage is dark. And we can restart, move down the path, go off into onto the trail. We find a magic stone, and then when we go back to the cottage, the magic stone is glowing. So you can see how the variable has changed the story that we tell. So you can do all sorts of really cool things with that. From tracking equipment, you can say, if check whether or not you have the magic stones, or if you have an axe to chop down a tree, maybe. You can say, if it's just, it doesn't need to be any kind of equipment. It can just be, have you gone to this place yet? So you might say, You know, there's a cottage, and then later on, if you follow the path, you know, there's a person there, and the person says, have you been to the cottage? And if you have been to the cottage, and the game knows whether or not you've been to the cottage because you created a variable, then the game can respond to that. You can say, yes, I have been to the cottage. So there's just tons and tons of stuff you can do with that. And all of that, there's a link in the description to an awesome resource that sort of teaches you, again, the basics of Twine, and gives you some more examples of how you might use variables and some other sort of more advanced things. But those are all the main basics of using Twine. Now, if you know a bit of computer programming, then you can do other stuff like change the look of the story using CSS. You can include music, you can include pictures, you can do all sorts of cool stuff like that. But really all you need is that really basic amount of programming with just making links to different story pages, and then you can do a lot of really cool stuff. So that's all I have for you. If there are any questions, or if anyone's interested in doing this, feel free to email me at tomsawyerBigRead@gmail.com. And this weekend I'll be available to try to answer any of your questions about Twine, but there's tons of great resources online as well, and check out the ones in the description. Check out my game Before the End of the World if you want to sort of see what Twine can do. There's some cool music in that one as well. And then check out the Twine file of it so that you can sort of get a sense for how I constructed that story. But other than that, good luck with making Twine games. It's a really cool resource. It's super easy to create sort of interactive games. You too can be a game designer and a game writer, which is a lot of fun. So the challenge, of course, is to tell us about an adventure that you've had that has helped make you the person that you are, to submit to our Tom Sawyer Adventure Scrapbook. So if you want to do that with Twine, I highly encourage that. It's very, very cool, and we will be uploading them all to the tomsawyerBigRead.com website, so everyone can play your game. So have fun with it, and if you have any questions, you can email me at tomsawyerBigRead@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to help you out. Thanks a lot. Hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing what you've got.